I've always wondered about these plaques at the side of the road, commemorating battles that no one talks about. This one talks about a battle that happened more than 100 years ago. I'm going to talk to some historians who will better explain what happened.
The Inch ambush occurred during the War of Independence. This was a chance for the North Wexford Brigade, the flying column. These were the active service unit, probably about 25 men, to strike a blow against the RIC and make a few bob.
The unit involved in that was known as the North Wexford Brigade Flying Column. So flying columns are essentially mobile military units. Their main aim was to harass the British forces constantly. The Flying Column, they were also known officially as Active Service Units, ASU for short, and they were constantly on the move, doing various raids, ambushes, and they're mostly primarily made up of men that were on the run, men who couldn't stay at home or stay in any one place for a long period of time.
Their intention was to ambush a lorry that was going to be coming through just after Inch, coming to Gorey with a payroll for the officers. Local scouts would have brought them all the way along. They would have ended up in, we'll say, Munaseed, coming all the way over to Cranford. They'd been brought by scouts, but eventually they would have made their way to Kynlearn, and the final two scouts at Kynlearn was a John Sheridan and another Cabinet man, and they would have led them into their final position up over what's called Manus Rocks. If you're ever going to Inch from Gorey, where the monuments are to the 1798 and the 1916, they're all there. There was a high sort of a cliff on one side, or I've been up on it, it's about 50 foot, about 40 foot above the road. So they would have gathered along there, 25 in all, spaced out over 5 to 10 yards each, armed with rifles and shotguns.
But it chose the ambush site because you had a high point which they could look down and ambush any people down below, and also there were several bends in the road. So once they crossed one bend, they weren't able to see what was in front of them, and they could block the road, and it was just very suitable for an ambush.
They also had a landmine made by a man called Daniel Byrne. Now the landmine they had intended to place on the road so that when the lorry drove over, and then that would have caused all sort of mayhem. But the ambush coincided with the day there was a fair on in Gorey, so they decided not to use the mine because they just didn't know who was going to cycle into the trap or drive into the trap. So they were in position probably from early morning, but by 11 o'clock there was no sign of this patrol coming, so there was talks about calling this off. So 12:30, just about to give the whistle to go, lads, get back home because it's getting late in the day now. And but as they were about to go, one of them spotted an RIC cycle patrol of 5 to 6 officers who were coming from Culgraney via Inch onto Gorey to probably do their shopping, but they would have been armed. So there was the Sergeant Dolan was first, then there was another constable, and then there was a young auxiliary constable called Frederick Dupree. He was an English chap and he'd been stationed in Gorey, but now he was in Culgraney, and then there was 2 more to the rear. So when these lads cycled into, we call it the kill zone, somebody fired the first shot, probably a little bit early, so the last 2 didn't quite get into it, but the 3 that were in the centre, they took the majority of the fire. The sergeant was hit in the leg and in the wrist. Dupree was shot in the chest, but they still managed to get into a ditch by the side of the road and return fire. And eventually, I think the local unit had decided, well, we've done enough now. We didn't come for what we wanted, but we've got something. So they whistle went, they withdrew, firing stopped.
The column quickly moved off because that was their tactics, hit and run. And they were also very much aware that the garrison in Gorey, which came with armoured cars and everything else, was on their way back out. But the interesting thing about the Inch ambush is that single event was like a domino effect that led on to several other incidents in the county afterwards.
The other 2 had got back to Inch, signal leader Arklow or Gorey were at the running into an ambush. From there, the lorry load would have come out and went searching for these lads, but these were gone. But this young Dupree, on the day he was being returned, his body was being brought back into Gorey. Word went to all the shops in Gorey, you have to shoot, and we want 1 person from each household to follow this funeral to show you're loyal and all. So that's what happened. The shops closed. one man didn't remove his hat and he got a box in the face for himself off one of the soldiers. So his remains were brought then to the Methodist Church in Gorey, from there to the railway station, from the railway station then by train to Dublin onto a frigate. Reprisal, the local army then decided, let's teach these lads a lesson. So Sean Etchingham, who was one of the leaders in the North Wexford, he had a bakery in Courtown on Main Street. There was a landmine put into that and it was blown up. And Mrs. Veeney up on North Parade, her house, they were given a warning to get their stuff out, and her house was blown up. Toss Burns of Inch, the pub, it was ransacked because they allowed, well, he must have known about this, so they ransacked the pub. And finally there was a Kenny's of Ballycale on the Ballycanoe Road. Their house, the two brothers, they eventually went to Australia or New Zealand, but their house was blown up.